welcome to another episode of Sydney Queer Muslim Role Models. My name is Cindy. Today I'm being joined by Omar, and I'll let Omar take it away and introduce himself.
Hey guys, my name's Omar. I'm a Sydney University student studying a PhD in Government and International Relations, and I'm happy to be here today. I identify myself as a Palestinian Muslim Australian, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, Omar, can we start with finding out a little bit about your experiences growing up as a queer Muslim?
My experiences, okay, so I'll give you the long story as short as possible. So I was born in Jordan, in Amman, and I came here when I was 12 with my whole family. So my father's Palestinian. He's originally from Nablus in the West Bank, and he immigrated to Jordan during the '67 war. Mm-hmm. And my mother is Circassian, which is a Slavic minority in Russia. And her family immigrated to Jordan during the Circassian-Russian war. So, I mean, both of my parents' backgrounds come from kind of refugee kind of enclaves. And then we came here kind of in search for a better life. So we came here in search for a better life, to take us to universities, and the initial idea was for us to stay here for 5 years and then move back, but then life took its course. And I said my experiences, so we moved to Castle Hill, which is like on the northwest of Sydney in the hills area, and they tend to call it kind of like the Bible Belt of Sydney because it's like the highest rate of people that go to church and all that. And when I grew up in school, it was quite it was a bit of a cultural and a religious clash because I had no other Muslim friends or anything. I think I was the only Muslim in my grade, to be honest. I never had this kind of association with Islam and faith unless it was in the home. And the home always was a connection back to Jordan. So I was in this midst of two worlds of, being either a Jordanian Muslim or, adopting, an Australian, Judeo-Christian kind of traditional value system. My parents were always like, oh, you're not Australian, you're a Muslim Jordanian, think about it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But that was like, when I was like 10 or 11 at the time. And then, so as of my experiences to go on? Yeah, so, and then when I kind of realized that I was gay was actually, it's a bit of romantic actually. So I had my first and only girlfriend when I was 16. Yeah. And we went to Paris for this like school exchange program, and she was like, so we just started dating and stuff, and then one night she wanted to come into my room, and I just looked at her and I was like, she's beautiful, but I'm not attracted to her. Oh my God, I'm gay. And I think it was like, I kind of always knew, but I was like in this tension of not realizing it within myself, like coming out to who I am as a person internally. And it really hit me when I started dating this woman in Paris. And then that was when I was in year 10. And then in year 11, I started realizing, oh my God, I actually can't change myself. So for a whole year, I was actively trying to change my sexuality through like all these different mediums. And I started looking into it, and, I was getting like immense anxiety, the tension between that and, what my parents perceived as the Islamic faith and what it should be. And then through that process, I think it was a bit hard for me because there was not only that tension between my sexuality and the faith, but also my notion of femininity. I wouldn't call myself the most alpha male person. So I had this fear of exposing myself to kind of my family and to the public, as in the public being the school, by hiding my femininity and hypermasculinating myself. So it was that tension as well. And the school because it was incredibly Christian and traditional, it was quite homophobic as well. So I had this double whammy of homophobia hitting in the school, but also when, you know, me and my friends who happen to be queer now as well, were bullied, you know, they could go back to their families and their home and talk about it to their parents and, you know, kind of relate and be like, this is what I'm going through. But I couldn't do that because when I go home, that means, you know, my parents would actually find out. So it was a pretty dark time for me, to be honest. And then from there, let me just remember this. Yeah, so after I finished high school, I think I went through a process of tension with my parents. Well, I did. So I was getting a bit more rebellious. You know, I was a bit of a nerd in high school. Like, you know, I used to do well in grades. You know, I projected all my anxieties of everything that I was going through into my academic merit because I just wanted to do well for my parents. And then I think I delayed that rebellious aggression till the end of year 12. And so after high school, I think I decided to move out. So I said to myself, you know, the only way that I can actually kind of explore my identity is actually doing it in a safe space that I thought wasn't safe at the time. And so I moved out, and I actually moved out in Newtown, and I've been living there ever since. And I kind of got full exposed into the queer community on Oxford Street. And so that was really, I mean, that was a beautiful year. I went clubbing every week. You know, I did the whole like Stonewall arc. Something was called Nevermind back in the day, because I'm old. And it was a beautiful time, you know. But then I got into, you know, there's elements of toxicity that come with the homophobia in the Islamic community, but there's also equally, in a different shape and form, the toxicity that comes from the queer community in Sydney. And so part of that was kind of, you know, the alcohol and the drug-driven partying, and so I got into that more or less more than I should have. And, you know, as I self-reflect now, I think it's because I was still going through the process of, you know, identity formation. And part of it was me feeling like I had to give one aspect of my identity up relative to the other. So I kind of literally distanced myself from my ethnic identity, from my faith in God, and adopting my sexuality as the holisticness of my identity, which, you know, upon self-reflection, I had to go through that. But,
for sure,
you know, that was then and there. And so what really changed for me, like just my own experience, is like when I enrolled into university, and so I enrolled late when I was 21. I was just like working in retail after year 12. And I was, so I went to university. I met all these people who were really like into like the intellectual scene of it all, enrolled in gender and cultural studies classes. And then I got a scholarship to live in Indonesia for a year. So I lived in Jakarta for about 9 months, and that was, you know, I mean, traveling is amazing, but it was like a fundamental point in my life, because it was the only time that I realized that I can actually compartmentalize who I am into one thing without other people telling me what's good and what's not. So I kind of navigated through life feeling like I had to, you know, feel like I have to, I don't know how to say it in an analogy. It's like, you know, a jigsaw puzzle where every piece is a piece of your identity. But when you talk to someone else that comes from a different node of a community, you have to give that piece up to kind of feel like you have to connect to them in some way. But, you know, in Jakarta, I you know, made friends with like, you know, queer Muslims there, and, you know, we had like really good discussions, and I started speaking Bahasa all of a sudden. It was like crazy. And then, it just made me feel like I can actually, you know, connect with my faith and with my ethnicity without giving up my sexuality, and vice versa, regardless of what other communities think of me.
For sure.
Because my faith in God is my only faith. It's not determined by anyone else. So, I mean, that's kind of, That's my experience.
Yeah.
So far.
I think it's really easy to relate to thinking that it's mutually exclusive when you've been so othered as a religion and a race in Australia, I think.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, even when I was like, can I be graphic? So when I was, even when you go on Grindr, when you go on social media apps, the level of racism that comes from it is like borderline hilarious. But then you go to, like where I used to live, or I'd go to Lakimbo and stuff because I used to get my groceries there. And I feel like I had to go back in the closet in a way. And I do it unconsciously. I do it through my mannerisms, my behaviors, the way I speak, the way I act. And that was back then. But now I can't deny that I still don't do that. But I'm more conscious and aware, and I do it not in terms of other communities accepting me. I do it only in areas where I feel like it's a safety mechanism to do so, which is everyone's agency to do that. So
Okay. I think you've talked a lot about how you overcame that adversity, but was there any other specific like resources or networks that you would have used?
Yeah, so the first person that I did come out to, and that was right after high school. Actually, it's a bit of a funny story. So I have 3 sisters and a brother, and I'm the youngest of 5. And my eldest sister I get along really well with. So she is a bit more progressive. She's progressive. Like, she's got gay friends and she doesn't care and all that. Yeah. And then I remember the night before we had the discussion, I was like speaking through MSN, through one of my close friends from high school, talking about like Stonewall and what happened that night. And apparently I never closed that chat. And so the next morning, my sister and I were having coffee in the city. She was like, why do you have this Stonewall thing? What is it? And I was just like, it's just a wall made of stone. And she was like, I know what Stonewall is. And then I started crying, and I was just like, it was like, like 6 years of, hiding, literal hiding. And like to the point of fear, because it was a fear of rejection. Yeah. And then, but it's the moment that I always knew that I would tell my sister, like that sister, because she was the most progressive one, but it was still hard. And so she has been my rock. Like, she's always been a connection to me. She's always supported me since then. And then when I gained confidence in speaking to my sister and gaining that support network, and for her to constantly acknowledge, it's not what you think, helping me with my relationship and my faith and my ethnicity, but also in terms of how to come out within my own way to my family and to the community. So that was really important for me, because I had no idea, because my idea of coming out was just completely fogged by my fear. And so she helped me guide that through. And so one after the other, I started speaking to my second sister, who was not fine at first. We didn't speak for a couple of months because she has more of a traditional note of faith to it. But again, like my other sister, she's the one that I'm talking about now, she's a psychologist, and so she went through a tension between her profession, she deals with LGBT people, and also, with who she is and her own value system and her relationship with her family. And she actively started researching about connections between faith and sexuality. And even though at the time she had literal prejudice towards queer minorities, that was, her love for me was overcome by it. So she overcame that. And then it was the same story with my other sister Abby. Like, it just happened one after the other. So I started doing it in my own time, in my own way. And then one after the other was fine. My mum, it took her a bit of work. She literally fell like down a set of stairs, like, she's so dramatic.
Yeah, classic.
And then because I don't know if it's like every like ethnic mother, but like they always have an iPad with them. And then she had this iPad, okay, and I was like, Mom, like, this is the situation. Because she started, okay, so sorry, this is all coming back to me now. So she started questioning it because I became more of the, you know, how I told you about the party scene and how I got into that. So she was like, why is he going out all the time? Why isn't he at home? And so she started snooping because there's no like private public division in the Arab house.
No.
So she would like walk into my door and started like, you know, looking into things and stuff. And she started freaking out one day because there was like 2 Panadol pills on the desk. And she like picked them up. And she looked at me, she's like, is this the drugs? And I was like, no, Mum. And then she started licking it. I'm like, how would you know how it would taste like? Anyway.
It's so amazing.
So she started questioning it, and then she saw like the DNA magazine, and that was like it. And so I had to tell her. Anyway, so she pulled out she like literally like was like fainting, and then when she got up, she like pulled out her iPad and started Google imaging the word gay. Have you ever done that before? Oh my god, it was like Tumblr at the time when you Google gay. And so she was like, oh my god, is this what you do? And it was actually quite traumatic then. I look back and it's like hilarious.
Yeah.
But it was the same story. Like she did not talk to me. She was just like, you know, this isn't normal. I can't believe my son isn't normal. He's mentally ill. Like, you know, like wailing. Like, what have I done to you? And it's because I cuddled you too much and all that same story. But it was the same thing. She went through a process of realizing that her love for me is like overcome by, you know, her sense of prejudice towards sexual minorities. And it's so interesting because her, you know, she has always been a fag hag. All her best friends in Jordan are hairdressers.
I love
I'm like,
it.
Mom, you know that they're gay. And she's
Put
like,
it
yeah, but I
together.
didn't want my gay son to be gay.
Yeah.
And so she still goes through this tension. Like, you know, I'm in a relationship with my partner of like 5-6 years now. And she goes, so basically my eldest sister, the progressive one, so her best friend is gay, and he was married at the time to a woman. He has 2 kids, and he realized he was gay, and then whatever, and he was telling that to my mum, and then my mum came up to me, it was literally like the other month, and she was like, so if Simon can go this way, can you go back? And I'm like, it's not a switch.
No.
But, you know, it's gone from her being so fearful and scared and thinking about what the community would think to more a diluted version of, I just wish he, like, you know, he was not that way. And so, I mean, the point of all these stories is what I'm trying to say is that my experience through support and network was contingent on my ability of thinking what is safe. And so I connected to my sister first, the progressive one, because she was the safest one. But then I realized that as you speak to more people that you can connect to, that fogness of fear tends to go away and it gets a bit more clearer. I'm not saying that it's not going to be hard, but it actually gets better. And that's kind of like a corny thing to say, but it literally does.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't, and to be honest, like, you know, when I came out to my brother, we still don't talk because of it. And that's been over 10 years, but I went through kind of like the process of grief, like a death, but it's not, you know, I went through, like, you need to actually go through your emotions. You know, I decided to bottle it up and it just manifested in different ways, in toxic ways. But then when I started feeling those emotions, I went through processes of rage and grief and sadness and hopelessness to acceptance, you know, and accepting the fact that, you know, you are loved and people should love you for who you are. And whoever doesn't, that's not on you, that's on them. And so, you know, I realize through this now, I'm almost 30, I wouldn't be saying this 10 years ago. But, and also the other thing as well is, you know, the idea of creating your own sense of family. So, you know, I speak to I mean, every family has their problems and I speak to most of them, but you can also create connections within the queer community that accept you as your whole. You know, don't ever feel like I've always felt like I had to give up something of who I am to feel like I can connect to people, which fosters a toxic kind of relationship, because, you know, these people wouldn't accept you as your whole. But once you actually love yourself and who you are holistically through the process of connecting to support networks that do accept you holistically, that expands to relationships that are so solid and stable and grounded. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. So you've answered, like, you've given us the advice for young people. You've showed us how much your life has changed since then. I just wanted to, like, really get a sense of, you know, that sense of achievement. Like, do you feel like you've almost made it? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, complete acceptance?
I mean, I don't know how to say this. Like, it's. I don't think it's a like a linear enlightenment. Like,
No.
you know, I think with us it's a bit more complex. Like with, say, the white queer community, you know, they've always been the majority. Like, you know, they've always had the sense of waking up and feeling like they've grown in a community that accepts them, and then they realize that they're gay, and then they feel like then they are a minority, and they have to go through that process of realizing about levels of prejudice and oppression. But with us, it's a bit of a double whammy. You know, we were born in a community that tends to reject us in different ways through different platforms, and then the double whammy of your sexual minority status is that you're rejected within your own family unit and your own community. And so that process of realizing that, you know, you've made it and stuff, that's still an ongoing process that you will go through that, I think, forever. But the process is not in terms of the end, but it's in terms of managing and accepting and also who you are. And then when you go through that, it actually empowers you. It empowers you to navigate through systems that aren't exactly in the best benefit for your identity, but it provides you with a sense of resilience. It provides you with the sense of knowing how to socially mirror, knowing how to navigate through different platforms. But in terms of getting there, I think the only thing that I would say that got there to a point is you know, having this idea that I don't have to reconcile between my faith and ethnicity and identity and all that, and through that it's that essence of empowerment. You know, owning your story, not only just talking about it as a sense of victimhood, but also empowering yourself once you feel like it's more of a story tale, empowering it in a way that drives you to whatever you want to be. Yeah, and I understand your PhD explores a lot of those themes. Oh yeah, so I'm doing a PhD again in government and international relations. So I look at how people from our background and from the Middle Eastern queer community, as well as the Indigenous queer community, so how do they navigate everyday experiences of racism, homophobia, and xenophobia, but then I do it through the perspective of food and food-related practices, because the way that we kind of identify and relate to our identity is contingent on these certain practices, whether it's at the home or through food. And food is at the central pillar of, you know, our faith. You know, like Ramadan is like the best iftar ever. It is. And so I talk through that, and I question and compare these practices between each of these groups. And then I reflect on how can public policy in Australia as a right to the city, what should they do to actually be flexible to the aspirational needs of people that come from our backgrounds, and our relationships to food and food-related practices. Yeah. Oh, that sounds amazing. Can't wait to read your thesis when it comes out. When I write it. Yes, when you write it, really soon now. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It was really lovely to meet you.
Yeah, and for anyone watching at home, if you do need some support about any of the issues discussed here, you can head over to sydneyqueermuslims.org.au and find your people and some support. Thank you for watching.